This is lecture number 15, and this lecture we're going to deal with the whole concept of the terminology used by the Nazis of concentration camps and extermination camps. Although the term concentration camp is often used as a term for all the Nazi camps, there were in fact several types of camps in the Nazi system, of which the concentration camp was just one type. Other types included labor and hard labor camps, extermination camps, transit camps, and prisoner of war camps. And as the war progressed, the distinction between the concentration camps and the labor camps actually became quite blurred, as hard labor was also performed at the concentration camps. The concentration camp network itself played a pivotal role within the Nazi regime as it developed over time. Chronologically, over time, the use of concentration camps can be divided really into three distinct periods. The first period being 1933 to 1936, then 1936 to 42, and then 42 to 44 to 45. That first period of 33 to 36 corresponds with the rise of the Nazi party to power and consolidation of their power in Germany. During this time, the concentration camps were primarily built and established for the detention of political opposition to the Nazi party. Following Hitler's rise to power in January of 1933, the Nazis began arresting political adversaries and placing them in these camps. By the end of July of 1933, 27,000 people had been taken into what the Nazis call private protective custody. In Prussia alone, 20 camps were established for these prisoners. In the fall of 1933, the Nazis began detaining other victims as well, including persons with whom the Nazis considered to be what they called asocial elements, such as beggars, tramps, common criminals. In July of 1934, SS Chief Heinrich Himmler named Theodor Eckel, who was serving at the time as the commandant for Dachau concentration camp, and appointed him as inspector of concentration camps and SS guard units. These guard units, later to become known as the Death Heads units, and performed the brutal work of guarding these concentration camps. In his new post, Ecke was in charge of the concentration camp prisoners' routine and punishments, and during this phase the main goal of the camp system itself was to deconstruct the opposition to the Nazi regime, remove any opposition at any cost. The second period we look at is 1936 to 1942. Almost all of the concentration camps established during this period were shut down except for Dachau. Larger camps were now built to replace them, accommodating a growing number of prisoners. These camps included camps such as Sachsenhausen, Buchenwald, Mauthausen, Flossenburg, Ravensbrück, Auschwitz, Majdanek, Nottwiller, Neuengamme, Stutthof. During this period, World War II broke out, and the Nazis established hard labor and what they called re-education camps. From 1937 onward, many companies used the German and Austrian Jews, followed by Jewish populations from throughout Nazi Germany for forced labor, housing them in camp-like conditions or in camps themselves. From the summer of 1938, Jews were imprisoned in the camps simply for being Jews. Particularly after November 8th and 9th of 1938, Kristallnacht as we know it, when 36,000 were detained. Throughout the period, the number of prisoners maintained in the concentration camps continued to rise constantly. When the war began, some 25,000 prisoners were housed in the camps. By the end of 1941, some 6 million prisoners were incarcerated in the concentration camp system. Numbers rose even higher after Germany invaded the Soviet Union in June of 1941. Tens of thousands of Soviet prisoners of war were then imprisoned in Nazi concentration camps and eventually murdered. In late 1941 to early of 1942, the death camps were set up at Chelmno, Treblinka, Sobibor, and Belzec, in line with the Nazi extermination policy of the final solution. Majdanek and Auschwitz, originally built as concentration camps, now were expanded to become extermination centers, as well as Birkenau or Auschwitz II, which was the extermination center, while the remainder of Auschwitz and its subcamps were functioning as subcamps as forced labor camps. In Majdanek, the prisoners who were not murdered immediately were incorporated within the concentration camp population. During the third period, beginning in February of 1942 till the end of the war, the concentration camp prisoners were exploited as forced laborers in the German armaments industry, manufacturing their weapons and other essential items for the German war machine. Previously, forced labor had been in use as a punishment. At this stage, however, the SS created a special economic administration main office, the WVHA it was called, to oversee the use of the concentration camp prisoners as manpower for both government-owned and private companies. The WVHA built many sub-camps next to industrial factories to house these prisoners and laborers. The standard living conditions of the camps varied, of course, from camp to camp and period to period. From 1933 to 1936, the work, food, and housing were bearable, and most prisoners were detained for approximately a year. Throughout the second period and starting of the third year, many prisoners died in the camps as a result of brutal treatment, harsh working conditions, malnutrition, and overcrowding. In 1943, the living conditions improved slightly, as the Nazis wanted productive results from the prisoners working in their armaments industry. Concentration camp prisoners lacked personal freedoms and the ability to make their own decisions. The SS maintained strict control over every aspect of their life. A prisoner who did not follow an order was severely punished by whipping, solitary confinement, loss of food rations, and other forms of punishment, and often death. The prisoners were classified according to their country of origin and the reason that they were interned. Some prisoners were given supervisory or administrative positions, such as room, block, and camp elders, or as capos, work foremen. In general, the German prisoners were given top positions and thus received more privileges. In Auschwitz, in that camp complex, the Polish prisoners were accorded the highest status. Jews and Soviets were the lowest on the totem pole of prisoners. The Jews were treated much worse than any other prisoner group. And after the war broke out, the Jewish prisoners had very poor prospects of even surviving. By October of 1942, the WVHA ordered the removal of Jews from all concentration camps inside the Third Reich. The Jewish prisoners were to be deported to Auschwitz and Majdanek in Poland, where most of them were to then be and were exterminated. By the fall of 1944, the Germans were losing the war clearly. The Allied front was advancing from all directions. The Nazis gradually started to close the concentration camps outside the Reich and sent their prisoners off on insufferable death marches towards camps still in operation in Germany and in Austria. So we've taken a look here at what the concentration camp system was like, and as I said earlier, there were different kinds. The extermination camps were key in the final solution as far as murdering all of the Jews within Europe systematically, and that began to happen in about 1941 and continue right through with the first establishment of the first camp, extermination camp in Chelmno, located near the city of Lodz, on December 8th of 1941, and there, by gas vans, they murdered 320,000 people. The numbers go on and on and on, of course. Auschwitz became a concentration and extermination camp, and we know that about 1.3 million people perished at Auschwitz alone. Belzec, Sobibor, Treblinka were set up then as a result of Action Reinhardt. Belzec was in operation and murdered 600,000 Jews. Sobibor, once it was in operation, murdered 250,000. Treblinka, about 870,000. Those annihilated